Hello and welcome to Week 2, Unit 4 of Application Development for SAP Business by Design. In this unit, we're going to look at defining logic with ABSL. Now, ABSL is the Advanced Business Scripting language. It's the other type of language that we'll use in the SAP Cloud Application Studio. It's basically a language that allows us to define logic and behavior for the actions and events that our object has. So in the last unit, we talked about what actions and events were. In this unit, we're going to go ahead and actually do some implementations of them. So we'll go ahead and create new what are called script files for our object. We'll go ahead and put some logic in those, and then we'll be able to utilize the actions and events of our object to achieve the behavior that we want. So let's go ahead and jump into the studio and see this. Now I'm logged into the SAP Cloud Application Studio with my development user, and I can see on the right, here's my new object bonus plan. I'm going to go ahead and right click on it, and I'm going to say create script files. And it's going to show me this screen. Now you can see here I just have the one node root, so that's all it shows me. And I also have a list of events, a validation, and an action. Now the action is automatically grayed out. Any action you create, it'll always be grayed out. Meaning that it's already selected and you intend to create a new what's called a script file for it. And script files are where we'll actually put our code, our ABSL code for each of these. I also already have my validation created ahead of time. I'm going to go ahead and do an after modify here as well. So if I want to create a script file, I can just select the checkbox and open it up and say create. On the right side, you'll see this mass enable. Mass enable will basically enable each of these events and actions to run on all instances of a particular node. So if I didn't have this mass enabled, when it goes to call the after modify, it's going to call it for each instance in particular of that node. If I say mass enable, it's going to call the after modify once for that node and just give me a collection of all the instances of it. How you want to do that is up to you and your specific use case. A lot of the time, and in this case, I'm just going to leave it unchecked and we'll go with just regular files themselves, not mass enabled. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK, and it's going to create some script files for me where I can put in my code. And you see here is my after modify. You can see that it says my bonus plan business object, the root node itself, what the event is, gives me some other kind of info and tips. You'll also see an import ABSL statement that's always there in all of our ABSL files, and that should be left there. We don't want to take that out. That's what it allows us to actually put in our code so that it knows what we're doing. And now I can just start implementing my logic. So let's do, since this is the after modify, let's go ahead and put some checks, some strict checks on what the user is entering. So we said before that we want to have a couple checks. One is the start date and end date, that the end date is after the start date. Remember, we created a message for that. And the other message that we created was around bonus plan, or the bonus rate being 0 or greater, not negative. So let's go ahead and do the bonus rate real quick. And we have a flag that we can check. Now I'm going to use the keyword this. This always refers to the particular node of that object that you're coding in. So in this case, this would be the instance of the root bonus plan object, the root node of the bonus plan that's being processed at that time. And this allows us to get to any of the variables and associations and actions of that particular node. So you'll notice as I added a dot and said control space, it shows me everything of this particular node, the root node. And I'm interested in the isConsistent flag, as we're going to use this throughout our coding to basically check and see if it's consistent or not and allow it to save or not. And I'm going to take the approach of setting this to true from the start, and then later on, if I see something that's wrong, I'll revert it to false instead of maybe having it by default false and then later setting it on to true. Now I could have also put in my business object definition a default value so that this is always true. That's an option. In this case we didn't because I wanted to enforce it myself. But here's our flag. It's now true. Let's go ahead and implement the logic for our bonus rate. So I'm going to say if this dot bonus rate dot, and actually I don't need a dot there, is less than 0. Right, so if the bonus rate is negative, I want to stop that. I want to raise a message. I want to make sure I set my flag to false. So let's go ahead and do this. This dot is consistent is now equal to false. And then I'm also going to do the keyword raise. And if I hit Control Space, it'll come up. I'll just type it. It's taking it a little while. Raise is how we can actually raise a message. And I would give it the name of my message. So I'm going to say raise, and my message is message negative values, and dot, and then create. And then I have to give it a severity. And the severity is if it's an information message, a warning, an error, something like that. So for me, this is going to be an error. I'm going to put an E. And if I look in the help documentation, I can see all about what severity types are available to me when I raise a message. And so now I have a check here that is to say if my bonus rate is negative, go ahead and set the flag that is consistent and raise a message, appropriate message that the user knows. Now I could always put this check in the validation on save if I wanted to and stop the save. I'm putting it in the after modify because I want to very strictly enforce it. I want to make sure right from the start that if the user has entered this value that I stop them and get them to revert it right away. Putting in the on save is also okay. Just then it's a little bit looser, right? It's not until they actually hit save that they see that they can't have a negative bonus rate value. So it depends on the situation how I want to enforce that. Now I'm going to go ahead and do some other things here. Let's go ahead and just paste in all the code that we need. So you see we still set this to true. We can see our bonus rate check is here, and I'm going to go ahead and look at some of this other code that I have. We actually have the check dates in there, and this is so we can see that our start date is actually before the end date, not vice versa. So we say this.start date, and you can see that it has this method called greater than. As it's a date, it has a couple extra methods that come along with it. So you can see delta, end of month, end of year, get day, week, month, things like that. So it's nice that for each of the variables that I have, there's some in-place value, or I shouldn't say values, functions that are reuse libraries that are available to us without us having to code anything extra. So we're using the greater than just to make sure that the start date is greater than the end date, which in our system actually means it's before the end date. I'm sorry, is actually afterwards. So if it's later than the end date, then that will go ahead and also set the flag to false, and that will raise the appropriate message. And you can see in this case, when we're raising this message, the date message, we still say it's an error, but we actually had two more parameters in that, right? We had to start the end date first and then the start date. We have to pass those in so that the message actually shows that data, and that's what we're doing here in line 27. Now, if I go down, we saw our bonus rate already. I can also see the employee one, and this is where we're actually going to fill our association. We're expecting that a user has entered an ID into the UI, and at that point in time, the after modify is called. And if there is an ID, it should be able to go to the employee object, retrieve that instance, and then we can store it in our association. And that's what we're doing here. So we say, we take a local variable employee that we'll put it in, and we say employee, which is the actual business object employee, dot identification, which is its subnode, where it stores its actual employee ID. And this identification has a retrieve method where I say this dot employee ID, and what this does is it gives us an instance of this employee identification subnode. From that, I do a check to make sure that it's set. The isSet is again another reuse library method that's there on an object or a node instance. And so if that's the case, I say employee.toRoot, right? I want to store the actual employee object, not a subnode of it. Employee.toRoot, and then I put it in my toEmployee association. So this is how I can take an instance and actually store it in my association. I could also do a query for the object through using the ID if I wanted to, but a retrieve is very direct and easy here. So I already have this there. Once I'm done, I'll want to save and activate that. And then I've implemented my onSave validation and the calculate bonus. Now in the validation onSave, you'll see all we're doing is just saying return this dot is consistent. Right, that's our flag that we're saying if it is consistent or not, and basically we're saying if it is consistent, allow the save to happen. If not, go ahead and stop the save. And this is the one case where we're going to have a return parameter. In my action calculate bonus, I again have some logic where I'm doing some checks. I want to make sure I get the right employee, and then that I do a check against the sales orders that are in the system to see that what are all the sales orders for this particular employee, where they're the employee responsible of it, and that are within the date time that we set for start date and end date. And from those, we'll go ahead and calculate the total value of all those orders to see what's the total actual revenue for this employee during that period in time. So this is our ABSL code where we can put in any logic that we need to. Again, this is any events, actions, validations that are there. If I go to help and the help documentation, I can see more info about this if I go to scripting languages and scripting languages for the Studio. And then we have a few places. So business logic, for example, right here I can see all the business logic things. So I can say for an if statement, what do I need to do, right? Imports, any kind of expressions, and also things around reuse libraries and built-in functions. We'll see this more throughout the class, but again, this is a very good reference. The help documentation tells you about any of the syntax and gives you examples of how to actually use those specific functions that are available to us. So that ends it for this unit. In the next unit, we will go ahead and go into tracing and debugging. Now, the tracing and debugging will require that we actually have a UI in place. We're not going to do UIs until the next following week, but we at least want to show it since it's in context of the language. And then when we get to testing with business users next week, you could actually go ahead and do the tracing and debugging. But for now, we'll go ahead and talk about it in the next unit. So thank you very much.